Pursuant to notice, we call up H.R. 1631, the Protecting and Enhancing Public Access to Codes Act. At any point, the chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for an opening statement.
This bill, honestly, Mr. Deutsch and I, with him as the lead, introduced it in the last Congress. But so it comes again, but it doesn't come again because we can wait forever. It comes because there is copyrighted material that ends up being in codes or in laws, if you will, of the United States, and the rights of the copyright holder. And the best example, of course, would be fire codes and building codes. We have to make sure you have access, and under H.R. 1631, you will have access to all of this information for free. On the other hand, there's a considerable amount of cost that these standard organizations, often nonprofits, that is well worth a small price that is paid for either a printed book or an organized search capability. On the other hand, the contractor who wants to take a series of books out to the site or have his notebook have a full copy of it to be able to refer to at any time would certainly and has historically been willing to pay a fee for it. This has had some history of court problems.
I strongly object to this bill decision. There's a long line of decisions that you can't copyright the law itself. Most recently, in a case in the D.C. Circuit, American Society for Testing versus Public Resources Organization, they said this: a serious constitutional concern with permitting private ownership of standards essentials to understanding legal obligations, access to the law cannot be conditioned on the consent of a private party. That was confirmed by the Supreme Court when Justice Roberts affirmed, saying no one can own the law. Law where citizens own the law that we make, not some private entity. Now, I understand that the chairman thinks that this has been satisfactorily resolved by allowing people to view a web page. That is insufficient. If we want robust debate, and in order to do that, for people to argue about standards, you have to be able to disseminate them, to argue about them, to critique them, not just to a view only. And I would note also that some of these standard organizations, having been pressed by the courts to make this information available, are now doing it, allowing it only if you give up your private information, you register with them, you give them their data. Never in the history of this country have we required citizens to give up their personal data in order to look at, understand, and argue about the law. This is a complete departure from the history that we have in our proud country.
Ultimately, this bill strikes a critical balance between enabling public access to codes incorporated into law and ensuring copyrights are protected and able to provide revenue to organizations that create and update the standards we need to stay safe and healthy.
The problem here is that you go to a website, let's say you're a civil libertarian and you disagree with part of building standards. You should be able to copy that, to publish it, to have discussions with others of like mind about that. You can't limit debate and understanding of the law.
So the question is, what's the change that led us to want to put in legislation to fix whatever the new problem is? Because I'm not clear on what the new problem is.
If the gentleman would further yield,
yes,
the
ma'am.
standards organizations lost in court. And so they've come to Congress because they've lost repeatedly in court.
In the most extreme, like what are we going to hear next? Road builders saying that you've got to pay to know what the speed limit is so that we can fund more roads? I mean, that would be the absurd extreme on one side. And then I also don't think that just because an organization collaborates with the government, that every thought they've ever had, every work product they've ever had, every manual they've ever had is all of a sudden in the public domain. So I do think that there is a balance. But I strongly reject the premise of the legislation that in the absence of these organizations being able to maintain a property interest that they can externally financially exploit, that they will just dissolve and cease to exist and have no interest anymore. Building codes. And I also worry about the litigation that this bill could spur, that we're post this bill. Could you be in an environment where people believed that they were engaging in, putting on a seminar about building codes or about fire suppression, and they start using things that then they're getting hammered in some intellectual property context for. So while this is
not correct that these various standard settings groups would fall apart absent charging the public for finding out about the law. For example, the American Society for Testing and Materials, they had, and their executive was compensated $4,500,000. Their revenue was over $100 million, and it was made up of their manuals, training documents, other materials.
Yeah, we seem to be in the wrong business, Mr. Lofgren, but
I think you do get to own the fonts and the charts and the graphs and all that, but you can't own the concept as it goes into law. This isn't the weaponization of government, but this is the monetization of legislation, in my opinion. I yield back.